Welcome to the Power of Purity podcast, the show that empowers men to experience their sexual gift in a healthier way. Now here's your host, Tony Ingrassia.
Hey guys, what up? I'm glad you could join me today for the Power of Purity podcast, and I hope everything's going well with you and that you're blessed as you continue to pursue your walk of purity before the living God. And I'm very excited about our episode today because we're going to continue an interview that we started in our last episode. This will be part 2 with Dina Alexander with Educate and Empower Kids. And her organization/ministry is intended to help parents, to equip parents with resources and tools and information that will empower them to help to educate their kids and train their kids and equip their kids to deal with the reality of growing up in a porn-saturated culture. Dina says, and I agree, that it's inevitable that every kid is going to see pornography and will be affected by it. So we have an opportunity as parents to educate our kids, to get our kids ready to speak into their lives and their hearts and prepare them and equip them for the reality of dealing with growing up in a porn-saturated culture. You know, guys, I remember when I was a kid, I believe I was exposed to pornography for the first time when I was 10 years old, and it deeply, powerfully affected me. And there was no adult in my life to speak to me, to help me, to equip me in any way to deal with this experience. And for those of you that have heard my story, you know how profoundly I believe my life and my sexuality was impacted by that experience. So I really, really believe in Dina and her ministry and her message, and I think it's incredibly important that we do everything we can do to prepare our kids for the reality of growing up with pornography. So with that being said, let's jump back into this awesome interview, part 2, with Dina Alexander with Educate and Empower Kids.
Yeah, I mean, and you can also talk about just various cultural pieces that we have, like that we have in the book. Like one of the topics is called Sex Means Different Things to Boys and Girls. I mean, that's a great discussion. We have another discussion about double standards. We have discussion about sexting and social media. You know, that's something that my parents never had to think about discussing with me. Sexting and social media as a teenager, that didn't exist in the 80s, in the 90s, even in the early 2000s. But that is something that is very real and very important for us to be talking about, that these discussions have changed quite a bit and that we got to be on top of it.
Right, absolutely. And I just want to say to our audience for a moment, I just want to encourage you guys, for real, you've absolutely got to check this out. Go to the website, educateempowerkids.org. Dina has so much wonderful information there. There's articles, there's information about the books and all kinds of good stuff. And I just promise you it's going to be very encouraging, especially for those of you that have kids and you're realizing and you're interested in being as effective as you can be as a parent. You're going to find so many good resources here that will really equip you and empower you to work with your kids on this incredibly important issue. You know, Dina, it just occurs to me, I wish that when I was a kid, my mom and dad knew about your website. You know, how many of us...
I wish mine did too.
This stuff was just conspicuously absent. I mean, there was almost no talk at all. It was the ostrich technique, you know, I guess so many parents just trust that, well, their kids will figure it out and they'll find the answers to their questions and, you know, they'll turn out healthy, hopefully, you know, and we're just kind of leaving our kids to chance. And it's like the stakes are way too high in this day and age.
Yeah. Well, and to our parents' credit, I mean, the culture, we were not being bombarded. I mean, there was definitely sexual content when I was growing up in the 80s and 90s, but it was nothing to the availability 2 clicks away. You know, we had to go and find an R-rated film, or we had to go and find something else, find a magazine, and we were still, we were living in a print-based culture. We had all these blocks, we had the daily newspaper. We did not have this fully, we are living in an image-based culture. And most of us are illiterate. That again is why we have to talk about that media literacy. Most of us do not know how to read an image very quickly. We have to really think about it. We're just bombarded, but most of us don't take the time to sit there and think, okay, hold on a second. Why are they selling this to me? Why does this woman look like this? Why does this man dress like this? What is going on here? And, that's where we are, we are at a disadvantage, and why we've got to just do our best.
Right. Something that was intriguing on your website that I observed was this idea that parents can actually damage their kids and their understanding and viewpoint of sexuality. Most of us, well, I'm picturing, like a mathematical scale. If you picture 0 in the middle, then going up is the positive scale, right? +1,
Yeah.
+2, +3. But going down, you can go underneath 0, -1, -2, -3. And I think a lot of times parents, they hope they would be a positive influence, but I think a lot of parents approach this kind of ostrich technique. And so there's just kind of this vacuum around the issue of sex. We don't talk about it. Nothing's said. Nothing's communicated. We hope the best for our kids. But in reality, there's different ways that parents can be not only are we not positive in the way we're influencing our kids, and not only are we not only neutral, but we can actually harm our children. And you listed 6 different ways that parents can harm their child's view of sex. I'll mention them quickly. Number 1, we convey to our kids that sex is nasty. Number 2, we're very vague about sex. Number 3, we let their friends damage their views. I guess presumably they're getting most of their information from their friends. Number 4, the ostrich technique or the ostrich approach. Number 5 is we lie to them. And number 6, we wait till they're teenagers. In other words, we start too late. So I'm intrigued by this idea that we can actually damage our kids when it comes to sex.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the big things that we do is that we're silent on the topic. When we are silent about a certain topic, we're conveying that it's a secret or that there's something shameful about it, and that's why we don't talk about it. And so again, that's just kind of thinking we have to, when we're thinking about these conversations, I always say we don't plan a big event. We should not plan, okay, we're going to have this big sex talk for 2 hours, and maybe we're going to have ice cream and balloons, and we're going to have this big crazy event. What we say is, have a small, discuss this with your partner if you're married, and figure out, okay, what are we going to talk about? But you want to make it so that the child can recreate the event. So I'm not going to create this gigantic, sex talk party, but I'm going to create just a small event where I'm like, okay, hey, we're going to talk about this, and we do it, But it should be simple enough that your child can recreate it. When they have a question, maybe you're driving in the car, maybe it's the next day, maybe it's a month later, they can recreate the event and talk to you about that. So in these different, things you mentioned about how we can be vague, or we leave it up to our friends, or we have the ostrich approach, we have to be thinking about, again, what is that big picture I want? What do I want? What do I want my kids to understand about healthy sexuality? What do I want them? Do I want them to understand intimacy? Do I want them to understand that this is something that should only happen in a committed relationship? Use your personal values, your spiritual values, your cultural values. Use your values to guide this conversation. My conversation is going to be different than my friend's conversation, from your conversation, from my neighbors, even people that I go to church with every Sunday with. It is going to be different from their conversations, because they know their kids better than I do, and I know my kids And I love my kids more than anybody else. So I need to guide that conversation with my own personal values, with my spiritual values, with my cultural values. And we need to be specific. I'm glad you mentioned one of the things that we do because we're afraid to create curiosity, or we're afraid to get too close to a topic, that we're very vague about it. We don't need to do that. We need to be honest and clear with our kids so they understand what we're talking about.
Right. It occurs to me, Dina, that I'm sure that this issue is incredibly difficult for a lot of moms and dads, because in a way it exposes the issues maybe that are undealt with in their own hearts and lives, maybe their own sexual history, things that happened to them, things that they themselves did or participated in. I believe that for many people, the deepest hurt and pain and shame of their lives often is associated with their sexuality and things that have happened around their sexuality. So the concept of trying to talk to my kids can be kind of intimidating, because it begins to expose things in my own heart and life and mind that are undealt with and unresolved, and maybe speaks of work that I myself still have to do so I can be in a healthier place with myself and with my sexuality, so then I have a chance to be healthier with my kids in these discussions.
Yeah, absolutely. But I find that in all of my parenting, and not just with talking about sex talks. Every personal issue I have comes right to the forefront with my kids, and that is, because either we don't want our kids to go through the same pain we did, or we don't want our kids to have an embarrassing, experience, as my kids have gone through puberty. Of course, it brings back to mind all the horrible things that I hated about middle school, all the things that I was so embarrassed about. And so that is the case in all of our parenting, I think. We definitely have that when we talk about sex. We start thinking about, oh my gosh, how did my parents do it? And did they do a good job? Or, oh my gosh, I was so embarrassed when they did A, B, and C. Or, man, I really wish they had talked more about this. So, we might definitely have that with these talks about sexuality, but I find that that's in every piece of my parenting, are my own personal issues come right up, and then it helps, but it helps me deal with those issues, and it helps me re-examine them, and also decide how important are they. That there's certain things that maybe I've let them stop me, but if it's going to affect my kids or hurt my kids, you better believe I'm going to work on it, or I am going to let it go. If I'm going to let that go because it's for the good of my kids. There's several things in my life that I've had to, I have to either deal with it or overcome it, because it's more important for me to be a good parent. And so that's part of sexuality, but it's part of, I think every other part of parenting.
Yeah, that's true. And it makes a lot of sense. And one thing's for sure, and that is we can only start with where we're at today, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And if I embrace the position, well, when I get my act together and I'm perfectly healthy and I'm at 100%, then I'm ready to talk to my kids. It's like we'll never be able to talk to our kids. So wherever we're at, we are our kids' best hope. So we need to offer them what we can, the best we can, and do our very best, and with God's grace and mercy, just move forward and start with where we're at, and trust that God can use that.
Absolutely. You just nailed it right there. We have to let go of perfection. None of us are going to do this perfect. I've been doing this for years. I've talked with other experts. None of us are perfect, but God does not expect perfection. Ever.
That's right.
He expects us to just do our best and leave the rest to him. That's it.
That's good. And I don't think our kids expect perfection either.
Absolutely not. I always tell people, I'm like, what your kids are going to remember about these talks? They're going to remember your tone and your caring and your compassion. that is what that is what you want to convey. And if you want to say to your kids, hey, I'm not an expert, hey, I'm not going to do this right, let them know that. And just say, I want to talk to you about these things because I love you and I care about you. And this is so important in our lives. And
Right.
that's why I'm sharing. They will get it.
Absolutely, and kids are intuitive. You can't trick them, so they will discern the stature of your heart and your words toward them, and how important this is, and how sincere you are, and they'll discern this is important, and this is really important to my mom, and so that teaches me this is important, and she really means this, and I can tell her it's coming from a place of concern and love, and she has my best interest. And so your kids will, they'll figure it out, and they have a tendency to trust their mom and dad.
Yep, absolutely.
So if I was to ask you, Dina, I don't know if it's too simple of a question, but, well, let me ask you this. Do you know what the average age of exposure to pornography is today? I notice on your website you say in one place that it is inevitable that our children will see pornography in this day and age. It is going to happen, almost like we cannot prevent it. So what is the average age that the kids see porn today?
The usual statistic that people use is age 11, that is the typical time. I have heard stories, of course, as young as 5 and 6 years old. My daughter was exposed in the 3rd grade. There are stories all the way through middle school, but it's that usually they will use the age 11 as the typical, that at some point they will have been exposed by age 11.
Right. And if I was to ask you, why is porn so harmful to kids? How would you respond? And let me just throw this in, that in my ministry and talking with men, something that I bump up against quite a bit is I don't think that a lot of men realize how powerful pornography is and how harmful it is. And I think a lot of people tend to minimize it, like it's not that big a deal. Almost like guys would say, porn is just, it's part of being American. It's part of growing up. It's part of becoming a man. It's just not that big a deal. And I think a lot of people minimize it. They candy coat it like it's not that big a deal. So how would you speak to that? Why is porn so harmful to kids?
It is harmful on so many different levels. One thing that we tend to forget about, again, is, and that's why we have started talking more about media literacy, is the power of the image. It's very difficult for our brains to unsee what we've seen, but also when we see an image, we want to make it true. That is how our brains work. So a child who's being exposed to maybe something in pornography where it looks like a simulated rape, or a lot of pornography which has some sort of coercion factor where she starts out saying no, but then goes yes. This is so confusing for kids, and what it does to a child's brain is far more damaging than what it does to an adult brain. A child's brain is still developing as well. Our brains don't finish developing until we're about 22, 23 years old. And until it's the same reason why drugs and alcohol have such a harmful effect on younger people. Their brains aren't developed. They're not equipped to deal with what they're seeing. A bottle of scotch is going to do a very different thing to an 11-year-old than it's going to do to a 35-year-old. Their
Right.
brains are not equipped for it. So a lot of organizations will talk about addiction and how addictive it can be. One of my major concerns is how hateful it is. Most pornography that I have viewed and that I have seen in my research is very hateful towards women. Mm-hmm. It often portrays a woman, I'm not going to say often, excuse me, it almost always portrays a woman in a position of powerlessness, where a man is not putting his hands on a woman unless it's to hold her down or harm her, or to have power over her in some way. This is the kind of image that seeps into our brains, that comes out into our thoughts, and eventually, I think, can affect our behaviors.
Right.
Where we start to think, oh, she must like that. If you watch 5 hours of porn, 10 hours of porn, and the woman starts out saying no, but then says yes, those kinds of things start to come into our brain as, oh, okay, she must like that. She must want that kind of behavior, especially a young person, a child, a teenager. This is where you start to form your ideas of sexuality, of what is sexy, what is beautiful. And if you're watching pornography, those things are going to affect you. Those are going to condition your brain. Think of all the things that we're conditioned by in society or in commercials. Like I think of about a decade ago, maybe 15 years ago, nobody ever bought body wash. So this is a product that came on that suddenly became so important. Before, most of us use soap and shampoo in a shower, right?
Right.
Then they started selling body wash. And now everybody thinks they have to have body wash. The ingredients are almost identical to shampoo, right? But we somehow have been conditioned to think that this is an important part of a showering ritual, right? And that maybe soap is not quite good enough, that we need to have body wash. That's a really simplistic idea, but that is something how, again, through marketing, we have come to realize, oh, I absolutely have to have that. And it's the same thing when we see an ad for a new cleaning product or for a type of beer or a type of shoe that, oh, I need to have that. Oh, I need to have those type of tennis shoes or I will not be a good basketball player. Images seep into our minds and into our brains, into our thinking and into our actions. So that is, to me, one of the greatest harms that pornography can do to children and teenagers, is that it can affect their behaviors, how they view women, how they view themselves, and how they see other human beings. There's a reason why a woman is never called a woman in pornography. She's always called something worse, right?
Mm-hmm.
She's called a woman, she's called a whore, a slut, whatever. That is purposely done. This is meant to separate us so we do not see her as a human being.
Right.
That we can dehumanize her, and then we can believe, oh, she must want that. She must like that. She must deserve that.
Right.
It's no different than what the Nazis did to the Jews during, and I know this might sound extreme, but it's no different than what they did. They never referred to Jewish people as human beings. They referred to them as animals, and that is so that they did not have to feel as bad about what they were doing to the Jewish people.
Wow.
And it's the same kind of thing in pornography. If we don't have to see her as a woman, we can see her as an object to be used and thrown away.
Right.
And so that's not only damaging to children, that's damaging to adults as well. And it's something for us to consider in our discussions. We need to talk about sex. We need to talk about the dangers of pornography, but that's where we go to the why. All of us are told our whole lives, don't do this, or yes, you should do this. And most of us don't care about those things until we understand why. And I want my kids to understand why this is damaging and why this is dangerous. And
Right.
To me, it's about those images seeping into our brains and the way we're constantly portraying women in pornography. It is dangerous. All of our future lawyers, doctors, policemen, being raised with watching pornography, that frightens me.
Yes. It's so good, so powerful what you're saying, Dina. It makes me think of the old adage, a picture is worth 1,000 words, So I'm thinking a young person is seeing these images, they have no frame of reference, and because of that, if they're watching porn, it becomes their normal. They think that these scenes and these images that they're seeing, oh, this is what sex is. This is what sexuality is. This is the way you're supposed to treat women. This is what women like. It begins to create a frame of reference that defines to them what sex is and how you experience sex and what you're supposed to do. I read an article just recently, and I can't remember the exact statistics, but the essence of what it was talking about is how the practice of anal sex has escalated among young people incredibly high compared to 20, 30 years ago, because it's so common in pornography today, and young people see it. So even young girls, 13, 14, 15, 16 years old, they think that they're supposed to like anal sex, and this is a normal part of sexuality, and so it happens way, way more today than ever, and it's because of how they're being indoctrinated through pornography.
Yeah, that is absolutely correct. That was never something discussed. That was never an option. When I was a teenager, nobody was into that. It was not part of anyone's repertoire. And now the pressure is on, and the pressure is on our sons and daughters, yes, to that, oh, this is normal, this is exciting, this is fun. And it's not. And my husband's a surgeon. And so when we've done reading and we've discussed this, and we're like, there's no, very few people actually have, a lot of pleasure in anal sex. But again, it's just one more thing that the industry has sold to us.
Right.
It's kind of like how a lot of women feel pressure that they need to be totally shaved down in their pubic area. And that again is from pornography. There was no pressure for that, when we were younger. But now that is considered normal grooming for a lot of teenagers, a lot of college girls, because that is what is being sold to them, and that is what is being indoctrinated into them of what is sexy. Right. A lot of men are expecting that. And that to me is sad. It's a sad thing because we're teaching, again, that to me is changing biology. Because what does pubic hair mean on a person? It means that they're an adult more. It means that they're ready to have sex. And so when we're conditioning people to think that you should want to have sex with somebody who is hairless in the pubic area, to me, you're teaching them to want to have sex with somebody who is not an adult, who is young. And that to me is a sad thing.
Well, it's certainly very sad and alarming to think that pornography then becomes the primary conveyor of information that's teaching our culture what sex is and how we're supposed to be sexual. I know that something I've said before, I mentioned earlier, I'm 59, and I do not watch pornography. I haven't watched porn for years and years and years because of how God has worked in my heart and life. And my point is that if I was to watch pornography on a regular basis, even now as a 59-year-old man, I can't imagine what it would do to me. My equilibrium with God, my equilibrium with my wife, how it would incite lust in me, how it would cause me to look at women in different ways. It would profoundly affect me as a 59-year-old man. And you're telling me you're going to put all of that on a 12 or 14-year-old boy and expect him to manage it, have any frame of reference or resources to manage the power, the weightiness of that pornography in any healthy way. How could a kid even begin to handle that?
Absolutely. And again, that's why we need to talk, and talk about it before they see it, because it is inevitable. They are all going to be exposed. They're going to be on a school bus. They're going to be at a friend's house. They're going to be on an overnight trip. And a friend is going to be like, hey, check this out. You got to see this. And they need to be able to see that and go, wait a second, that's fake. That's one of the big things we talk about, not just saying, hey, stay away from it. Not, it's very important to have filters and blocks on our computers, but we have to let them know you're going to see this and it is fake and it is harmful. And this is not how women want to be treated. And this is not love. This is not intimacy. This is not what sex looks like between two people who care about each other. And again, have these discussions so that they're ready, because they're going to be exposed and they need to be able to look at that and go, wait a second, this is not right. This is counterfeit. This is not how, a woman wants to be treated, so that they can see that, so that they can know that. When they first see it, most kids will talk about that first exposure, whether they're 9 or even when they're 13, 14 years old, it's a bit traumatic. And we forget about that as parents. We're so scared that they're going to see it and they're going to think this or they're going to think that. We have to, again, that's where our compassion needs to come in and realize they might be a little bit aroused, but they are also going to be a little bit traumatized in what they see. And so we need to, again, prepare them for that exposure.
That's good. Dina, our time is almost up, but I might want to ask you just, two more things occur to me. And one maybe is, I don't know how to say quite what I want to say, but, my ministry is with men. So many men are struggling with pornography because of this issue of accessibility. I use the word plague, and I'm talking about in the church, in the Christian community.
Yeah.
The most recent statistics tell us that 68% of Christian men view pornography on a regular basis. And a regular basis means anywhere from several times a week to at least one time per month. 55% of married Christian men watch porn on a regular basis, and 50% of pastors watch porn on a regular basis. And I'm just thinking, I'm not quite sure how to ask a question, but I just kind of want to connect the dots. So many Christian men are struggling with this issue of pornography in their own life. And now we're challenging them to come home and to look at their kids. And as a Christian dad, you're going to try to lead your children and convey to your children how unhealthy porn is, how dangerous it is, how inappropriate it is, how dishonest it is. And you're going to try to lead your children to take a stand against this. You want to protect your kids from experiencing porn, but at the same time, you yourself are deeply involved with this. And I happen to believe that when a man, the father in the home, as the pastor of that home, as the person in spiritual authority in that home, is participating in pornography himself, that it's allowing a kind of breach in the umbrella of his spiritual authority, and it makes his kids that much more vulnerable to these things. So I don't know. I guess I just want to challenge dads that are listening. Guys, we got to absolutely deal with this in our hearts and lives if we're going to have any moral authority to lead our children and to lead our families. So I don't know if you might want to comment on that.
Yeah, I think, one of my big comments I want to, it does affect us. It affects our hearts. It affects our minds. It affects our spirits. And I think we tend to think of it again as very compartmentalized. Oh, okay, I look at my porn and then, hey, I'm with the family. But one of the biggest complaints I have from wives is I know when he's looking at porn because he stops engaging with me and he stops engaging with the kids. So I think it's one of those sins that we tend to think about as, I'm not drunk, I'm not doing drugs, so this is my outlet, this is what I'm doing, and it's fine, it's not going to affect my other lives. It does. It does affect, it seeps into every part of our lives. And the second point I wanted to make is that, the industry has become even more shrewd in the last few years and realized that they have not been marketing to women. And they are now marketing and targeting women. And so we already are seeing a lot of women who are having a problem with pornography, and we're going to continue to see that. And I really hope, I'm seeing some resources starting to come out to help women, but that is something that we are going to need so many resources for. That's the next big step, I think, in this movement, is helping women who are facing porn addiction as well. It's
absolutely an escalating issue with many, many women. Maybe my last question, Dina, I'm wondering, just for the fun of it, do you have a favorite Bible verse or passage that you could share with us?
I do. It comes from, I believe, let me get to it. It comes from, it's either Elijah or Elisha. In 1 Samuel.
I always get those guys mixed up.
Yes, of course it's not coming up. Hold on. Here it is. Okay, it's in 2 Kings 6. And it's when Elisha is they're going to fight the Syrians, and Elisha's servant says to him, he goes outside and he sees all these soldiers, he sees everybody, he sees that they are surrounded, and he says to Elisha, this is 2 Kings chapter 6, verses 15 through 17. And he says, and when the servant of the man, this is from the King James Version, the servant of the man of God was risen early and gone forth. Behold, an host encompassed the city, both with horses and chariots. And he says, alas, my master, how shall we do? And Elisha answers back to him and says, fear not, for they that be with us are more than they that be with them. And Elisha prayed that his eyes would be opened, and his servant saw that they were surrounded, that they had spiritual, horses and chariots of fire around them. And that's something that we sometimes forget when we are overwhelmed. We are, we're fighting an industry that is so huge and so encompassing and is so tempting for so many of us that I think we can sometimes be overwhelmed by that and overwhelmed with our personal, temptations and things that we are trying to work on our lives. But we need to remember that they that be with us are more than they that be with them. That we have people on the other side rooting for us, helping for us, and we have the greatest power in the world, that we have our Heavenly Father and His Son Jesus Christ.
Amen.
Helping us out.
That's awesome, Dina. Thank you. Is there any last thing you want to say? Maybe a question I should have asked you, but I'm not smart enough to know to ask you that question. Any final comment or observation you want to share with us before we finish up?
I think just the final comment is we can do this. Our kids are worth it. Our marriages are worth it. And just take the time, it doesn't have to be this big, scary thing. It can be small little, it's not a big talk. It's several chats, take the time to chat with your kids, to protect them, to prepare them, and help them become amazing adults.
Amen. That's well said, Dina. So you guys listening to this podcast, I want to just say in love, you don't even have the option. You have to go to this website, educateempowerkids.org. I'll say it again, educateempowerkids.org. If you're concerned about our culture, this issue of pornography, you know how you yourself have struggled with it in your heart and life. If you're concerned about your kids growing up under these influences and preparing and equipping your kids, then check out Dina's website and her ministry, and there's going to be a lot of information and resources that will help us on this journey. So I really encourage you guys to do that. Thank you so much for being with us, Dina. I really, really appreciate you.
Thank you. It was great.
God bless you. Guys, thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Power of Purity podcast. I'll look forward to seeing you in our next episode. God bless you.
Thanks for listening. Visit powerofpurity.org for more resources and information. And if this podcast has been helpful or encouraging, please invite a friend to listen. Until next time, remember, there's power in purity.